Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I also have the new channel, Maria Tells a Story. And I'm back today with our book, The Mystery of the Black Hole Mine. So this one has started out pretty dangerous, actually. But I'm on chapter 3, When a Boy Remembers. Pris threw her arms around DJ's waist in the most unusual way. For a moment, he stared down at the top of her head. "What?" he asked, glancing at his father and stepmother. Dad didn't say anything. He rose and went into the living room. DJ pried Pris's arms loose from his waist and followed Dad. Still, in the silence, the man bent and picked up a pair of long-cuffed asbestos gloves. He slid them over his powerful, work-hardened hands and knelt in front of the glass-fronted stove. As he opened it, a blast of extra air made the flames leap higher within the firebox. That happens in my wood stove, too. "Dad?" DJ bent to look his father in the eyes. They seemed strangely shiny and moist. Dad did not look up. He picked up an 18-inch long round of dry live oak and laid it in the stove. The boy turned back to the kitchen. "Two, Mom, what's going on?" In the months Dad and Two Mom had been married, DJ had never seen his stepmother cry, but now her eyes were bloodshot and tears were sliding down her cheeks. Two Mom's hands flew about nervously like two birds trying to escape. "Oh, DJ, your father just got home." He waited for her to continue, but she rested her elbows on the table and suddenly buried her face in her open palms. Almost sick with anxiety, the boy spun back to his stepsister. She was still standing numbly by the back door. "Pris, you tell me," he demanded. As always, her brown hair looked untidy, like an eagle's nest had fallen on a fence post. Her voice was shrill as she looked up at DJ. "It's just what I said, DJ. Dad lost his job, and now we're going to have to move. And I don't want to move away from my friends." "Move? Move where?" DJ cried. "Maybe Sacramento," Pris wailed. DJ was shocked. Mountain born and reared, he found the idea of living in a city in the flat valley below the Sierra Nevadas terrible. "Dad, I can't move away from Alfred, especially before Christmas." Dad's voice struck with the force of a slap. "David Jonathan Dillon, do you think I want to move? You think I wanted to lose my job?" Dad's voice seemed to explode as he re-entered the kitchen with quick strides. He jerked the asbestos gloves off. "I've worked for that lumber company practically since before you were born, but they're closing the mill and laying everyone off. Foreign competition, they said. So we've got to go where I can get work. And you know there's nothing in Stony Ridge and probably not much possibility at Indian Springs. So that means Sacramento." Two Mom laid her hand on her husband's strong forearm. "Easy, Sam," she said softly. DJ gulped and absently took off his coat to hang on the peg by the back door. Indian Springs wouldn't be too bad. The county seat was just a dozen miles or so down in the foothills. DJ would have to ride the bus there to high school each day when he finished at Stony Ridge Grammar School. But Sacramento? He asked, "When?" "Soon as I can find work," Dad replied dully. They laid us off at quitting time tonight without any warning. Pris wailed, "But it's almost Christmas." The four Dylans glanced at each other, then the calendar near the refrigerator. DJ said quietly, "Less than a month?" Two Mom tried to smile. "It'll be okay," she said as cheerfully as possible. "The Lord will take care of us. He always has." She brushed the back of her right forefinger gently across her eyes and continued, "He took care of Pris and me when my husband was killed in the logging accident. God took care of you, DJ, when your mother died in the auto crash. Now we're a family, and He will take care of us in this situation too. So," she continued firmly, "I'm fixing supper while the rest of you get washed up." DJ looked at his dad. Sam Dylan nodded soberly. "Sure doesn't look too promising, Hannah. But we've been through worse things. We've got to trust." Pris brightened too. "Could we have a family hug and prayer?" DJ saw his father hesitate. Pris was asking for something brought from her first home when her father had been alive, and she was Priscilla Higgins. Dad would have never done that before Two Mom and he married. Still, DJ was pleased when Dad nodded and held his powerful arms out wide. His wife quickly stepped inside the comfort of his right arm. Pris moved to Dad's left. DJ hesitated, stung by the sharp way his father had spoken. Slowly, DJ walked to stand beside his stepsister. DJ felt his father's calloused hands tremble as it gripped the boy's shoulders. DJ started to close his eyes but stopped abruptly. "What about Grandpa?" Dad glanced at his son. "He's naturally welcome to move wherever we go, but he got a mind of his own, you know. So we'll find out what he wants to do first thing in the morning when we pick him up for church." There was a gray snow sky the next morning when DJ went outside to the backyard to check his dog. Hero gave a joyful bark and rushed out of his doghouse next to the detached garage. "I knew you'd come home okay," DJ said, kneeling to clutch the little mutt in his arms. "Yeah, you're a good dog and always come home." Hero wasn't much for looks, as Grandpa Dylan would have said. The dog was a mixture of hound, Airedale, and Australian Shepherd. He had a long black nose that stuck out from his muzzle a good half-inch beyond where it should have been. He had a tan color of an Airedale and a short stub tail. To DJ, Hero was the best dog in the world. The boy tried not to think about what would happen to Hero if they moved to the city. Two Mom was allergic to dogs, so Hero couldn't stay inside, which would be necessary if they got an apartment in Sacramento. "We've got to find a way to stay here," DJ told the little dog fiercely, ruffling his ears, "and we will." The boy had changed pants but transferred the nuggets of gold to the fresh pair. He felt the gold nuggets weight against his leg. He couldn't say anything about the gold, but the gold offered the best way to stay in Stony Ridge if the mysterious follower in Jawbone Ridge hadn't also discovered the mine. "Sure wish I could tell Grandpa," DJ told Hero. He gave the dog a final pat and went inside to dress for Sunday school. The four Dylans left early and drove into the country to pick up Grandpa Dylan and tell him about what had happened. Driving along the winding mountain road, DJ felt a little better than he did last night. He had really found a gold mine. It didn't matter if Dad lost his job. All night long, DJ wanted to ease his family's concerns by telling them about the gold. But a secret was a secret, so DJ kept his promise to Alfred and didn't say a word about the gold or the mysterious voice that had threatened the boys. Dad drove his family into a rough but paved country road. He parked in the dirt shoulder near where Dad, Grandpa, Mom, and DJ had lived before Mom was killed, and Dad later married Pris's mother. It gave DJ a strange feeling to see familiar places now that he might have to move away and never see again. He jumped out and quickly ran into the little unnamed creek. Two slender Lombardy poplars stood silently beside the bubbling stream. Now that is a type of tree that is it will grow tall but very narrow. They were nearly bare for winter, except one yellow leaf near the top of the tree nearest the creek. Dad, the water's low enough we can cross on the railroad ties the man at the church put in when they rebuilt Grandpa's house. This bridge is easier to cross than the stone ones we had when we lived here, and DJ's voice trailed off. He had almost said, when Mom was still alive. But the boy didn't want to say that. Once a person was dead, it seemed people didn't mention them very often, especially when there was a new marriage and a blended family, as some of the church people had called them. The house had been rebuilt after a forest fire, but the surrounding ponderosas, oaks, cedars, and other trees that had stood in majestic splendor in the hills were now ugly and black. Even those trees that did not burn had died from the terrible heat. Acres of dead trees now stood where all had once been green and beautiful. There was no driveway up to the house, which was about a quarter mile up the steep hill and hidden just beyond the hilltop. The boy ran easily across the footbridge of blackened timbers. Dad held two Mom's and Pris's hands and helped them ease them gingerly across the same bridge. DJ reached the other side and started running up the rutted pathway towards Grandpa's house. Dad called, "Tell him about everything, DJ." "Okay," he called, and began running up the rutted excuse for a path that led to Grandpa's house. He felt a whole lot better about things now that he remembered the gold, but he still had to make sure he could file on that claim. He was desperate to get to Indian Springs in case whoever had followed Alfred and him also knew about the mine's location. When DJ topped the rise, leaving the rest of the family far behind, he heard Grandpa's dog, Stranger, bark. He ran out from under the low front bridge, trailing a long chain from his collar. Stranger raised a ruckus, as Grandpa would have said. The dog had been a stray that the old man befriended. Stranger was of medium height, probably white, mostly white with some black splotches. He was probably part pointer, but no prize winner. His button ears, roach back, ewe-neck, and crank tail made Stranger about as ugly as DJ had ever seen. But Stranger made it possible for Grandpa to have a companion so he could live alone like he wanted, way out in the country. DJ was glad for that. As the boy drew near the house, he saw Grandpa talking to an unknown man. The two men were standing in a burned-over area behind the house near the first stand of dead trees. They glanced up at the dog's bark. DJ slowed uncertainly, but Grandpa recognized him and waved him over. "This here's my grandson, DJ, and this is Ora Octavius. He's hired on to help Old Man Crabtree, who owns all the land round here that burnt, except in this house and a third of the acre around it. Mr. Crabtree told Ora here to bring me a message which he just done." "Howdy," DJ said. It seemed more grown-up to say what Grandpa always said. Mr. Octavius blinked and drew back slightly as DJ approached close enough to shake hands, as if the man offered to do that. Sometimes people shook hands with boys the age of DJ, and sometimes they didn't. This man didn't. He had the look of an outdoorsman, but he wasn't a catalog-looking one. He had the gaunt, thin look of a person who didn't eat well. He hadn't shaved for days, and his heavy coat of pants smelled as if they hadn't been washed in a long time. His brown eyes, hidden under the sagging brim of a sweat-stained old felt hat, somehow looked strange to DJ. Mr. Octavius didn't even speak to DJ, but turned back to Grandpa Dillon. "You let me know what you decide, Mr. Dillon," the man said. "I'll pass on the word to the boss." He started walking rapidly away, crossing the rolling hills towards the nearest standing dead trees. Grandpa called, "Wait and meet the rest of the family. They're coming up the hill." "Can't." The man's word came, but he didn't turn around. He walked away with the ground-eating strides. Those are big steps. "Unfriendly Jasper," Grandpa said. "Wouldn't even shake and say howdy with you. He's the kind of man you stand upwind from." Do you know why that would be? Because if you stand downwind from him, you get the smell, and he wasn't clean. Funny thing, I've heard tell of Ora for years, but I never laid my eyes on him until today. How come I've never seen him before, Grandpa? Grandpa led the way back towards the house. "I hear he lives somewhere up in these mountains. Don't rightly know where. Some folks say he's a little loose in the attic from all the batching." So he's a bachelor. All these years while he roams through the hills. A little strange, all right. Comes down over the hills sometimes to make a little money, doing odd jobs. Like now, when he's working for Crabtree. When Ora's got enough eating money to last a while, he disappears back into the mountains. "Something seems familiar," DJ replied. "Just forget about him being downright unfriendly, DJ. He didn't mean no harm. He just ain't had no raisin', I reckon. Well, come on in the house. Soon your father and the women folk will get here. I'll tell you what Ora wanted." DJ watched the man disappear a little beyond the rise before Dad, Two Mom, and Pris topped the hill from the creek. The boy followed his grandfather as he limped towards the house. The old man walked with the aid of what he called his Irish shillelagh, that's a cane. It eased the weight off his arthritic hip. He wore a bright green and red Christmas-colored tie, a double-breasted blue suit coat, long out of style, and a pair of baggy brown slacks. Grandpa didn't think about how the clothes looked. DJ smiled at his feisty old small grandfather. There was a special bond between the two that never existed between father and son, although the boy desperately wanted to have the closeness with his dad that he had with Grandpa Dillon. "Howdy, stranger," DJ said as he came up to the dog chained to the front porch. He was answered with a sloppy slurp of a wet tongue. "Hey!" DJ cried, jerking his hand back. "I already had a bath today." Grandpa chuckled and peered over the top of his wire brim bifocals. He set his Irish shillelagh against the back of his favorite old cane-bottom rocking chair. It still rested on the porch by the front door. Grandpa held out two age-spotted and wrinkled hands. I've been needing a hug for a powerful long time, DJ. Got one left? The boy nodded soberly. Guess I could spare one. DJ grabbed his grandfather around the chest and felt the old man's thin arms encircle him. They trembled a little. DJ thought a hug was about the nicest feeling in the whole world. Grandpa dropped his arms as the rest of the Dillons topped the rise and headed towards the porch. "Sam," Grandpa called. "Hannah, Pris, right glad to see y'all. I've got some news." Pris skipped ahead of the others. "We got news too." Grandpa didn't seem to notice. He picked up his cane and waved it in a broad sweep at the family to stop up. He wanted them to stop up on the small porch. "See all them dead trees? Fellow named Crabtree owns all the land there's on. Sent a word today by Ora Octavius." DJ met him. "Well, Crabtree said he wants the land cleared for reseeding new trees. He said if we'uns would cut down the dead tree, we can keep 75% of all we make from selling firewood. Crabtree will keep a quarter." Dad didn't answer. DJ saw him push up the front door, into the front door. "Let's go inside where we can talk," he said. A few minutes later, Dad told his father about the mill closing, being laid off and probably having to move near Sacramento to find work. Grandpa didn't say anything. For a moment, DJ glanced around, feeling soft and warm inside. This was almost exactly like the house where he'd lived with his mother and father and grandfather before the car accident. The original house had burnt down in a forest fire. After the fire, a duplicate had been dismantled, taken apart, across town and rebuilt here by the men of Stony Ridge. To the boy, this was the closest thing to a permanent home he'd ever had. He didn't want to move away. His thoughts were interrupted by Grandpa tapping the toes of his shiny black Sunday go-to-meeting shoes with the rubber tip of his cane. "Well, I'm obliged for you thinking of me kindly that way, but I'm going to stay here till the good Lord calls me home. Now, let's go to church." DJ led the way out of the house and down the hill. He was glad Grandpa wasn't going to move, but the boy didn't want to move away and leave Alfred either. As the mountain boy glanced over the dead trees towards where Ora Octavius had disappeared, DJ stopped in his tracks. "Now I remember," he cried aloud. Ooh, remember what? So that's the end of today's chapter. This book is filled with mysteries right from the beginning. So I hope you enjoy it, and I will be back to read another chapter tomorrow. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming and keep a story in your heart. All right, bye-bye.